I'm very happy with this. All in all, we're doing rather well. That works beautifully. Okay, I've still got some work to do on the batteries in these other two cavities, and the reason I've left it is, as you can see, there's a gap along that line, and that is because when I push it down there's no gap, it's nice and carved, but because the wood is so thin, it's decided to distort a little bit. Now this isn't a problem. There are several things that can be done. The first is when you put finish on one side of a thin piece of wood, it tends to curve. So basically, if I put finish on here, it should lift up and take on the exact shape that we actually wanted to do. So I'm not going to mess around with any of the batteries until the batteries. I've got batteries on my brain. I'm not going to mess with any of the magnets until I've put the finish on, and then we see what happens. The other option is, if the finishing doesn't do what I want it to do, I can bend this a little bit and glue a piece of veneer or something there to hold it in the shape that we require. And this is something similar. There's a little bit of distortion with this plate here, and it's just because we're using wood. It might be a case of I need to put a veneer just to strengthen it all in there, and I've sort of expected to have to do that. Now finally, before we have apply finish, we need to fine sand it. There's still a little bit of a pencil line there, but most importantly, all of the edges, those are sharp edges. You never want sharp edges, especially with lacquer. If we were lacquering this, we'd have to put a pretty hefty, or a relatively hefty radius on. For an oil finish it's not so important, but I'm using 240 grit paper, although it's very old paper, so it's probably closer to 400 grit now, to round the edge over. And I have to do that on every single edge of this instrument, inside, outside, round the corners. This whole guitar needs cleaning up, so I'm going to go away and do that now. I'm using 320 grit to round all of these over. 240 was a little bit too coarse. This close to the neck, we have to use a chisel. This is going to be such a beautiful guitar. Of course, comfort is the most important thing, and that wasn't quite right. But then again, I didn't expect it to be. I'd just roughly shaped it before we glued it in, and now it's glued in, we need an all-access neck joint. Your fingers are more sensitive than your eyes are where it comes to curves, or at least mine are. I suspect that is it. Look at that. I could tap the pickup if I wanted to. This is a 24 fret Les Paul style with complete and utter access. I can even play an E chord right up there. Sanding in these nooks and crannies is rather difficult, so I've got some incredibly fine and flexible little files that do the trick. Again, it's the last little small details that make a true artisan created instrument. Once you've got it tidied up, any glue spots or anything like that, 240, 320 and 400 grit paper. And this is rather difficult to keep in focus. And the instrument is going to be perfect. Now these edges are a little bit sharp, and that is far from ideal. I could quite happily use my sandpaper and run these edges over, and that's what everybody does. What I am actually going to do is a little bit more subtle, and I am going to put a bevel around the edge. And this bevel is going to be prettier, and it's just going to add a little bit more shape. And you can use a chisel, which is all well and good, or you can use little planes. That's a little violin maker's plane, and this is my my beautiful little Veritas block plane. This is 40mm long. In fact, I'm going to use this where I possibly can, just because I've never used it before, in anger at least. Now obviously it's not going to get into there, but that's not a problem, because in there we're going to be doing something else. How beautiful is that? Now obviously I'm going with the grain, so I'm cutting in that direction, but from here you need to cut in the other. So never pull a tool towards you, but I'm demonstrating because I'm on video. So that goes around that way, and I'm cutting with the grain. Now instead of an amorphous edge, we've got a beautiful bevel. I love my new tool. In the corners, a sharp chisel used upside down. On other guitars I've made the chamfer wider in that section, but just to give it a little bit more shape. But I don't think I'm going to do that this time. I think I'm going to have a relatively uniform chamfer all the way around the edge. And the reason for that is the side dot inlays. That just feels, yeah, it feels right. Plus it's much more difficult to do something that's even and uniform. I have done the carve, and using a cardboard backed sandpaper and a block, very carefully kept my hard lines. And now we are at the final stage, one last sand to 320 and then 400 grit paper. The whole guitar, every single square millimetre is sanded down to 320 and then 400 grit fine paper. And this is the very, very last time we'll do this. I can't wait to get oil on this beastie.